Welcome to class. Today we're going to have our first taste of building an interactive application. I'm going to use Simple GUI and show you how to open a frame and create a button inside that frame. In particular, I'm going to walk you through building an old school calculator. In fact, when I did the first version of this video and people saw it, they said, "This is not a calculator. What you're building here is something I don't recognize." So I'll kind of show you a little bit of history of calculators. I'll give a little quick, like one-note description of what our calculator should look like. And then I'll walk you through the basics of getting our calculator going. And then in the next lecture, we'll extend it using input fields to allow us to actually enter some numbers. Let's go to it. All right, let's start talking about building our first interactive application in Simple GUI. So for this application that I'm going to sketch out, we're going to build a really primitive calculator. Now, when I first described this to folks, they were like, "Oh, what you're building is not a calculator." So let me kind of give you a little background. So this here is kind of a fairly simple old calculator. We have kind of buttons that allow us to enter numbers. And when we've entered a number, we've actually entered what I'm going to call the store in the calculator. This is the running result we're keeping track of. We have arithmetic operations over here. We can do plus, minus, times, division. So I could say plus, and now I could enter an operand. So I could say 23 and equal, and I get back 79. So this is the kind of functionality we want to mimic inside our Simple GUI application. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to have some data and some operations in here. So I'm going to need to model the store. It's kind of our running result. We're going to have an operand, what we're going to actually kind of use and apply in this operations. Now, they're kind of the four traditional operations: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. We're going to have an extra one called print that just shows us the contents of the store in the operand. We're finally going to have this swap operation here, and I'll explain why we need swap in a second. So whenever we hit a button that adds, subtracts, multiplies, or divides, we actually have kind of a simple formula we can follow to update the store in the operand. We're going to just take the store, take the operation, and apply it to the operand, and we get a new value for the store. Now, how do we actually get numbers into our calculator? For this lecture, I'm just going to always start out with the store being 15 and the operand being 3, and we'll kind of play around with it from there. In the next lecture, I'll show you how to use an input field to enter a value for the operand. And that explains the reason for a swap, because we enter something for operand, and we could swap and actually place it into the store. So let's go through and actually kind of look and see what our app might look like before we start writing code. So here's kind of the layout of our calculator. We're going to create a frame in Simple GUI, and that's going to be where our input is going to be entered. It's going to have kind of two things. It's going to have a control area on the left, where we're going to create buttons. Those buttons are going to have labels that tell us what they do, things like print, swap, add, subtract. We'll have a canvas on the right. In this example, the canvas is going to be empty. We're not going to actually draw anything on the canvas until next week. So where does the output from our calculator go? It's going to be printed out in the CodeSculptor console. So this is where output goes. And we're going to see things like store equals something, operand equals something, store equals something, operand equals something. And those printouts actually come from hitting buttons. So for example, over here, go down. How do we get this? Well, maybe we said print. Okay, how do we get this output? Maybe we said swap. And how do we get this? Is actually interesting. The store was 3 and the operand was 12. How do we make the store 15? Well, we hit add. So that's kind of a sketch of what our calculator might look like. So let's go through and actually write some code. So let's build the basics of a calculator. So what I have here sitting in CodeSculptor is two functions that share two common global variables. So we have a global variable store and a global variable operand, and they're going to be acted on by the functions output and swap. And later we're going to build an additive subtract function that are also going to manipulate them. So output just prints out the contents of the store and the operand, and swap, using this statement right here, swaps the value of store and operand. We have 3 calls at the bottom, one to output, prints out the store and the operand. Then we swap them twice. So if you run this, you see the store is 12, the operand is 3. We swap, we get 3 and 12. We swap, we get back to 12 and 3. So let's go through and make this into an interactive application now where we have a button, one that prints and one that swaps. So we should see the same output over here, but instead of having these calls now, we should actually have something that's essentially a frame with some buttons that allow us to do this. Okay, so we've got our code base ready. Let's go out and look now in the docs and figure out how to create a frame and a button in Simple GUI. So we'll go up here to Docs and click on Docs. This pops up the documentation page, and you notice there's 3 tabs here. The first one is Simple GUI. So we want to do 2 things. We want to create a frame, and we want to create a button. So let's click on Frame here. And so there's actually a command in Simple GUI that we can use to create a frame. It's simplegui.createFrame. Takes a title, a canvas width, and a canvas height. And then once we've created the frame, we need to go through and create a button. And so down here, sure enough, there's a button, and we can say frame.addButton, and it takes the text label and a handler. And then optionally, we can give it a width. So with those 2 operations in mind, let's go build our interactive application. So the starting point will be, we always need to import Simple GUI. And let's see. We're going to need to go through and create a frame. So we can say frame is equal to simple GUI.create frame, and what will we call it? Oh, let's be enthusiastic and call it a calculator. And what do we need to do? We need to give it a width and a height for the frame. Let's give it, say, 200 by 200. We could also optionally give it a size for the control area, but let's just go ahead and let it default. And what do we need to do next? Well, we need to get rid of these calls here. We're not going to be using those. But we need to go through now and register the event handlers for the 2 buttons that we want to create. So we're going to say frame.addButton. And we're going to call this first button print. And its handler is going to be output. We'll give it a width, make the width of the button 100. We could say frame.addButton swap. And we call the function swap. Give it a width. And then the last thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to say frame.start to get everything rolling. So we could go back and I'll put some comments in a little bit here, but I think this should get us going. So let's just give it a crack and see what happens. So pull it down here. I have a blank canvas, 200 by 200. I have 2 buttons, print and swap. So let's call print. So I printed out the store and the operand. That's very nice. Let's click swap. Oh, it swapped the store and the operand. Let's do it again. Looking good. It actually seemed to work pretty well. Well, let's go ahead and go on. Let's try to add in a button now that adds the operand to the store and a button that subtracts the operand from the store. So to do that, we're going to need to go through and create 2 more buttons and then create event handlers for those buttons. So let's go through and make the event handlers first. So I'm going to define a new event handler, call it add. And what's it going to do? We're going to need to declare store and operand as being global. Remember, if we don't declare them as global, they'll always be treated as local. So we're going to need to say global store and operand. And then what are we going to need to do? We're going to need to update the store. We're going to say store is equal to store plus operand. And the last thing is it'll echo what just happened. So we'll need to say output. And let's go ahead and register that button. So we're going to say frame.addButton add. We'll give it a width. And let's run it again. So we now have a control area that has 3 buttons, print, swap, and add. So let's print things out. Looks good. Let's swap them. That still looks good. Let's do an add now. So when I click add, what's going to happen is we should take the operand 12, add it to the store, and make the new store 15. Very nice. Let's add some more. Looks good. All right, let's go on and build sub real quick. And we're well on our way to having at least the button part of a calculator. Global store operand. We're going to say store is equal to store minus operand. And we're going to say output. And then what do we need to do? We'll go down here. We'll create a new button, frame.sub. Now let me get add button. Call it sub. And give it the callback of sub. Give it a width of 100. And if I didn't go too fast, I think we're good. Let's run that. So here we go. I can print it out. Let's see, we can swap it. We can add it. We can subtract it. We can keep subtracting it. We can add some more back in. And you can see we've got something now that allows us to manipulate the contents of the store and the operand. And this is really kind of the way a calculator works. Now, of course, calculators have one important feature. We can actually enter numbers. We don't always have to work on 15 and 3. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come back in the next video. I'm going to show you now how we can use an input field to enter values for the store and the operand. So I'll see you back in a second.